Hi, this is Stan Bush.
Hi, this is Stephanie Calvert.
This is John Payne.
This is Jack Hughes.
Hi, I'm Carrie Stevens.
Hey everybody, this is Prescott Niles.
Hello, I'm Kofi Baker.
This is Tony Franklin here.
This is Britt Lightning from Vixen,
and you're listening to Play That Rock and Roll.
Keep rocking with Joe.
This is not a test, this is Play That Rock and Roll. I'm your host, Joe K, and today our guest is a fellow content creator. Abigail Devoe hosts a YouTube series called Vinyl Monday, and she recently passed the 12,000 subscriber mark in less than 1 year. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to have her on as a guest to talk about her show and the material that she covers on it. Vinyl Monday is a series of retrospectives and reviews of some of the greatest albums of all time. She has covered the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and so many others. We're talking about the absolute apex of the classic rock era. She's able to do this series because she has an extensive vinyl collection. And since Record Store Day is just around the corner, I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about, well, records with a fellow collector. So over the course of this interview, we talk about how Vinyl Monday came to be and how she became such a big fan of classic rock. We talk about her production and fashion, and also her impressive vinyl collection. She then talks about her admiration for women like Pattie Boyd and Pamela DeBar, and she also shares her feelings on Eric Clapton, which are, to say the least, complicated. Finally, we conclude with a look at some of the RSD 2023 releases that have caught our attention, and she tells us what Record Store Day means to her. If you'd like to learn more about Abby and Vinyl Monday, check her out on Instagram, and more importantly, subscribe to her YouTube channel. If you're a fan of classic rock albums, you're going to be impressed with what you find there. Also, if you enjoy the work that Abby does on her YouTube channel, I would really recommend you also take a look at her website, which is reallifelayla.com. We will talk about it more in a bit, but I can tell you that the essays she has posted over there on her blog are stellar and absolutely worth reading. So with that, here's my conversation with the creator and host of Vinyl Monday, Abigail Devoe. You are the host of Vinyl Monday, which recently surpassed 12,000 subscribers. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And basically on this show, each Monday you review a classic, iconic album from the classic rock era, which is, of course, why I wanted to have you on the show. You and I like a lot of the same music. So let's start with a bit of some background and an introduction here. How did you get the idea to start Vinyl Monday, and what made you come up with that format in particular, and how did you roll it out?
Right. So Vinyl Monday actually has a really interesting origin story that I don't think a lot of people know, is that on my channel, I do both the full Vinyl Mondays that usually run between 20 and 30 minutes, and I do a 60-second version just as kind of a recap. So if you don't have time to sit down for 30 minutes, you can consume that and you won't miss too much. Vinyl Monday started with that. It started with 30-second clips on my Instagram because Instagram was rolling out that Reels feature and I wanted to get involved somehow. I thought, I have a lot of vinyl records. I can talk at least a little bit about each one of them. And people like classic rock. People in the vinyl community would be interested in that. So that's where Vinyl Monday started. Then it moved into 60 seconds because cramming whole albums in 30 seconds, not a great idea. Just sort of the speed bump that I hit on the way. And then I took things to YouTube.
And then you've made longer format content since then, which is excellent. The analysis in those videos is really insightful and impressive. Another aspect of your channel that's very impressive is your production. And I wanted to ask you about fashion in particular. I know that you are very deliberate with the fashion you choose to wear in each of your videos when you're talking about the music it relates to. And I must say, as a fellow YouTuber, your thumbnail game is elite tier, and I'm very jealous.
Thank you. I've recently stepped that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's huge.
It's been a fun challenge to teach myself how to edit those.
Absolutely it is. So can you talk about your thought process behind that aspect of production? How do you choose the fashion you decide to wear, when it comes to the various albums you talk about?
Well, sometimes I try and mirror the album art. I did that with Crosby, Stills and Nash. I was wearing my blue denim shirt. When I am really strapped for thinking of something to wear, I'll just throw on like a white blouse. I think I did that for Kick Out the Jams. I was super new to YouTube and just kind of threw whatever was going on. But I try and move with the decade. I try and tie in the colors of the album art. Sheer Heart Attack by Queen, that outfit was fun. That was totally 70s. I tied a shirt to mimic a jumpsuit kind of thing, and I put my hair in rollers. That was a lot of fun. So I guess I just try and mirror the vibe of what's going on in the album art and the fashions of the time. I have an extensive wardrobe and I need to wear it all somehow. So this dressing for Vinyl Monday kind of helps me express that. With those 30-second Vinyl Mondays way back in the beginning, about 4 or 5 months in, I started hating it. I was like, this is not working. This is becoming a drag every week. What do I do to make this fun? So I remember the first album I dressed for, it was Jimi Hendrix, Axis Bold as Love. And I had this purple turtleneck sweater, and I threw like a little embroidered vest over it. And that was kind of the first aha moment. Like, okay, the fashion component, this is making it fun and bearable.
I was just thinking that must be a factor, because for people like us to make content, before all else, this has to be fun. We have to enjoy what we do, right? So very cool to hear that.
That injected some life into the whole thing for sure. And now it's what I look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see behind you set dressing is important too. I once again, I might need some work, but yeah, all this extra stuff, that's where the passion comes through in the videos. It's not just the knowledge base. It's having the fun extra stuff too, which is very cool. Anyone who's seen your videos knows you have a very large record collection. So this is one thing I love to ask anybody who collects records. What's the secret to maintaining a large record collection? Because it is physical media, and that stuff, can get damaged and, decay and all that stuff. What do you think is the best? What are some of the secrets that you have to keep everything in order and organized and keep track of the stuff that you have?
Right. I rely on cataloging my collection on Discogs. That has been a lifesaver for me. I've done it since I was first collecting, probably almost 6 years ago now. And that's so that I don't go out and buy duplicates of the same thing, because duplicates of 1 or 2 albums, that's fine. But when you start accidentally accumulating duplicates of everything, it takes up a lot more space in your collection than you think it does.
And pricey.
Yes. Yes, I really did luck out with my collection. I inherited it, about a third of it. So I do recognize a lot of those albums I would have paid a pretty hefty price tag for. And I'm really lucky to have gotten the head start that I did.
Well, absolutely. And for someone, I've been collecting records, I think I first started in about 2009. And the difference in what you can find at a certain price back then versus now is heartbreaking. The jump in prices for record collecting nowadays is it's almost a turnoff to the whole hobby itself. It's so disappointing to see that sort of exploitation. I mean, even for not just new records, but the old beaten up ones, go for pretty high prices.
Joe, that is so true. I just bought a record to have on Vinyl Monday. I was really excited for this record, Boy Genius. I counterparted it with Crosby, Stills and Nash, kind of have an all-male supergroup and an all-female supergroup in the same week. And that album was $35 when I bought it.
Ugh.
That was a lot of money. Another one that I didn't realize was going to be as pricey as it was, Bee Gees Odessa. You can't find that for under $25, no matter how beat up it is. Layla gets pricey for some reason, even though I see it every time I go record shopping. It makes me sad that this price hike is making the hobby inaccessible, because that's really all I want for vinyl collecting, is for it to be accessible and not an intimidating hobby to get into.
Well put. Absolutely. That's probably why I really got into it. When I did, I of course loved the music, but finding just physical items that were connected to my favorite bands, in the $2 bins and the $1 bins or whatever, that was the stuff that was really fun for me at first. Candidly speaking, I bought records before I even had a record player, and the really beat up ones, I used to buy them just to put up on my wall. I used it as artwork. But anyway, so let's talk about. This is probably the question you must get most often. What drew you to the classic rock of the 60s and 70s in the first place? Was this something you were raised on? Did you discover it later? How'd you get here?
I was not raised on classic rock. My parents were very much 90s. They were a product of grunge and sort of the 90s alt-pop thing. So that was where I started. And I make a point of mentioning this because the 60s and 70s didn't come up until college.
Oh.
When I started collecting records, that's just the most of what was in my local record stores. So some of those things I picked up out of curiosity and kind of following essential collecting lists, just essential listening, and I wanted to brush up on that. But the real 60s and 70s boom didn't happen until I've told this story on my channel a couple times. I inherited a good part of my record collection. I show up to this guy's house expecting to take on 150 records, and there's closer to 300.
Oh.
So I say, oh my God, how am I going to pay for this? I'm panicking right now because I brought a truck out here. I'm wasting everybody's time. What is going on? But I'm talking to the guy, and we made this connection over loving guitarists, loving the art of guitar playing. I guess somewhere through that conversation, maybe my naivete charmed him, because I walked away with the whole collection without having to pay a dime. He just wanted it off his hands, and I took it off his hands on the condition that there would be Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel. Guess what? There were neither of those things.
Oh.
So I now have over 300 albums of artists I've never listened to. I'm just going through these things like, this album art looks cool. I know this guy from this place. But I made myself listen to an album every day just to get through and get familiar with what I had. And I totally fell in love with it. And looping back to the beginning, because I have to make this relevant, my beginnings in 90s grunge really primed me for this, because some of those grunge bands were basically psych bands. My first favorite band was Smashing Pumpkins. They're basically a psych band. So I was able to find connections with my music taste beginnings, and that was just lovely too.
That is so cool to hear. And I like the idea of listening to an album a day. When COVID started and the lockdowns went into place and we were all stuck at home, that's one of the first things I did when I had this social media set up. I started listening to a randomly selected album a day, and I'd write a short review of it on my Twitter just to entertain myself because, I was stuck at home bored. And, that was a really good way to just familiarize myself with some of these artists I like deeper into their catalog. So speaking of going deeper into the catalog, of course, I've noticed your channel is really focused on the 60s and 70s output of some of the greatest artists of all time. But I have to wonder, most of these artists did not quit working in 1980. A lot of them had discographies that went into the 80s and 90s, and there's a lot of people who point to that era for a lot of classic rock bands as like when stuff goes downhill and there's less impressed. I have mixed feelings about some artists in the 80s. I'm a weirdly even bigger of a fan of certain artists from the 60s that, when they're in the 80s. Generally speaking, broadly speaking, can you talk about how you feel about the later discographies of some of the artists that you're a fan of?
Right. So it's interesting. I try to interact with it, and I try to sort of have an independent opinion on that music aside from their prior work. And I'll admit, it can be hard. It can be really hard when this is not a production style you're crazy about. That's usually the roadblock that I hit, is my interest in a production style of the decade. It drops off around the early 80s and it comes back in the late 80s. There's just this valley in the middle that I do struggle with, and things on both sides of the valley, pretty cool.
Okay.
Generally speaking, about the artists that you've talked about on your channel, unfortunately, we're just at a point in history where a lot of these artists are quite old, and a lot of them have retired if they're even still alive. Have you had the opportunity to see some of these artists in concert? Do you like going to classic rock shows? What's your interaction with live music?
I don't go to live music very much at all. Let's see, I saw Dylan in 2019, and just as soon as he was out there on stage with that white hair, shorter than I expected, I just started crying because it's Bob Dylan. I'm in the same room as one of my all-time favorite artists. I saw the Outlaws. They're all old, and half of them, I think there's only one guy from the original lineup now, that I still had fun then. Let's see, Farm Aid, Neil Young, that was incredible too. I'm really not fazed by artists aging, just because I'm in the same physical space as these guys who once upon a time were my age and creating the music that I love so much at my age. And then they have like this big long career after that. I'm just dazzled by the whole experience. I don't care if they can't sing or if they look different. I don't care at all. I don't even know what most of these guys look like.
I think that's a good way to see it. I think if you're overly concerned with the appearance of just someone aging, you've lost your priorities somewhere. That's not why you go to see a concert. At least I don't. So one artist in particular I was hoping you were going to mention, because I've seen him in concert, but one concert or one artist that you've talked about a couple of times on your channel, and I love how you talk about him, is Eric Clapton. And you have called him your problematic fave, which absolutely cracks me up because I sort of feel the exact same way. So how can I ask this? Like, absolutely do not want to fall into any sort of trappings about cancel culture or, bitching about that. But I want to talk about how do we as younger fans reckon with the fact that some of these artists from a previous generation, A, did some stuff we're not crazy about in the past, and B, sometimes make boneheaded comments in the present, How do we separate, the music from the artist, but also still appreciate the artist because it's like the artist who made the music? When you think of certain artists that irritate you maybe in their personal lives, how do you reckon that with like your fandom? How does it not ruin your fandom?
Right. Clapton really is the perfect example.
Yeah.
Because this album that he in part created, Layla and other assorted love songs, is arguably the reason my entire online presence exists. I really got passionate and enthusiastic, most importantly enthusiastic, about this period in music because of this album. And that album is inextricably attached to Clapton's personal life.
Yep.
So I take Layla not as much a product of Eric Clapton, the dude, but it's Eric Clapton, the artist, in collaboration with all of these other amazingly talented individuals, Tom Dowd, Dwayne Allman, Bobby Whitlock. And it's a product of Eric Clapton and this outside entity, his muse at the time, Pattie Boyd. So it's not so much attached to Clapton himself, but it's attached to this, I don't know, a world that he'd surrounded himself by. The music didn't so much come from him. It was more expressed through him. He was the medium in which this thing was brought forth into the universe. So you can't totally detach him as a person, but you can detach him most of the way.
Yeah. Do you think that's important for fans to do, or is it like something that you do because, maybe things that he's done in his personal life like really offend you? Or, what are your feelings on that beyond the music?
Man, I detach it because I have to.
Mm-hmm.
In the realm in which I focus on, I just have to, or else there will be so little media for me to consume.
Oh.
And you know what? I like digging into stuff like this. I'm not crazy about empty media consumption. I like having something I can dig my teeth into and something that makes me conflicted.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I don't seek it out, just to clarify. It just sort of happens to me.
Well, that's what happens is like when we become fans and we learn about the artists whose music we like and we read the books about them or the books that mention them. And, we learn about the meanings behind various songs. It's the fans who are like the first ones to know, hey, this is kind of shitty, or this is something that I don't really like. So if to even find out this information, I think, at the start of it, you at least have to be a fan, and that's where that conflict comes from. But I just think this topic is interesting because, you and I weren't there when all of this went down. We become fans later on, and we have to digest and process like fandom differently than the people who grew up with it.
That's certainly been a hurdle to get over with my core viewer base, who were all alive, or at the very least, they were small children when all of this music was coming out. So that's been kind of a barrier both me and this audience, we've had to navigate. And it doesn't always work out. See the Blind Faith video.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I've
poked through the comments, but I guess some dialogue is better than none, and at the very least, with some of your audience who might not even be on board with some of the things you're talking about, you might just be getting them to think about it for the first time in 50 years too, and I think that's important.
If people are engaged with
Yeah.
the content, if people are engaged with the history, that's what I care about. I am simply a media for that taking place.
Absolutely.
Nothing less, nothing more.
Yeah.
Last year, and I want to highlight this, I think anyone watching who's seen your videos should definitely check out your website, because you've posted some very heartfelt and thoughtful essays. And I wanted to ask you about just a couple of them, because I think, that's a great way to go deeper on a certain topic that isn't necessarily the album itself. And one of the essays I read, well, a couple of the essays I read were about, in particular, someone you mentioned earlier, Pattie Boyd, and also Pamela Devoe.
Yeah.
I've read Pamela's books. I think they're fantastic. I suspect you have too. Can you talk about these two women in particular, what they mean to you, and how they influence your content?
Right. When I was first discovering all of this classic rock music through this vinyl collection that I was so unfamiliar with, when I stumbled on Layla, imagine the trip that it is to listen to Layla and then discover the whole story behind it. As I was listening to all of these albums, I was like, I wonder what these musicians looked like, because you usually don't know from the jackets. Sometimes you just have no idea. So I would look that up on Google and Pinterest, and I just thought, like, the Beatles and the Stones just looked so cool. And the Beatles, they just look great too, how they evolved from the mod thing into the very psychedelic thing, and then into the 70s with all the brown and the leather. But then I think, well, what did their wives and girlfriends look like? And I stumble on Pattie Boyd, the woman Layla is about, and I was just transfixed by her look and how effortlessly she transitioned from the super dolly girl look of the beginnings of her modeling career into like full-on rock star's wife with all of her matching luggage and big sunglasses, traveling with Eric Clapton. I was just so taken by it. And I said, if I could call back to a bit of this and really steep myself in this world that I've now discovered through the fashion, I will be happy.
Very
so
good.
That's really, Pattie was sort of the entryway for me to relate to this world. And then through someone, I discover Pamela Devoe, this woman who, in her youth, she lived this world. She was, out on the Sunset Strip. She had this girl group with all of her friends, and they would go out and dress in vintage clothes for their time, like stuff from the 20s and 30s. So as a vintage enthusiast, that really sucked me in. And then I read I'm with the band, and gosh, there's just this heart behind it. There's this real soul behind it, and how involved she is in this world, how she just throws her weight behind all of her fave raves, and that really resonated with me. When I started reading I'm with the band, this is around the time I was discovering the MC5, and I was just crazy about these guys. Everything about them. I threw my whole heart and soul behind this band that has been broken up for 50 years. And it can be a profoundly lonely experience. And Pamela's writing made me feel not so alone. So I've really, and you know what? There's a different way that women interact with this world of classic rock, and I just felt so seen for loving as hard as I did.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that that last part in particular. I've talked about this on the show before. I've interviewed a couple of women who have written memoirs and been involved with their own eras of classic rock. I talked to Bobby Brown and Carrie Stevens, and they talk about what it's like being in a rock star's world while not necessarily being the rock star. Yeah. And one thing I appreciate about stories like those, and also I'm with the band, is they seem so much less invested in like the myth-making aspect of classic rock. If you read really any rock star's biography, almost to a one, they're all trying to build up their own myth, right? And that's fun for a while, but if you really want to know the actual story of what actually happened, I've found that, you know, women who write memoirs about these things are a little less starry-eyed, a little less interested in building, you know, some sort of epic story, you know. So that's why I like talking to people like that. Someone I talked to recently in Nashville was BB Buell, and BB just put out a new book, and I was wondering, is she someone, your eyes lit up, so I have to guess that you're familiar with her. Is she someone who's been on your radar?
Well, yeah, I follow her on Instagram. So
oh, great.
I'm kind of more familiar with her in the current than her involvement in the music world through the 70s and the 80s. I'm also a huge fan of Todd Rundgren, so so there's that connection there.
Yep.
I admire her too. She has a very different relationship with that realm than Pamela does. Almost entirely opposite ends of the spectrum. One embraces the groupie label and the other does not utilize it.
She's okay with Muse.
Yeah,
Okay.
Muse. Muse is right in the middle. You can be a Muse and a groupie, but not all Muses are groupies.
Yes, well put. It's funny that you say that about Instagram, because after we finished the interview and turned off the mic, she insisted that I get an Instagram because I'm not on Instagram. And I told her, I follow you on Twitter, and she was like, no, you got to get on Instagram. I'm like, all right. So that was a fun moment. She's a very cool person, and, you know, I got a copy of her new book and looking forward to reading that. And one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the show is because we are coming up on Record Store Day this year, and you obviously are well established on having a fantastic record collection, vinyl collection. This annual holiday is, I think, done a really good service for even old school record fans of like giving something for us to look forward to each year, to really engage the hobby, especially as we've talked about how prices of records have kind of been a turnoff. And unfortunately, I think prices on Record Store Day aren't exactly like good, but at least you're paying for something that's, you know, rare and unique instead of something that 10 years ago you could have got for a tenth of the price. Anyway, all that to say, is Record Store Day something that you've looked forward to in the past? Is that something that you participate in every year?
Right. I have kind of an interesting relationship with Record Store Day, in which I have never bought a Record Store Day exclusive on the day. I haven't gone out to a record store on Record Store Day with the intent of buying a Record Store Day exclusive release. I haven't done that. But in college, I had this record store near my campus that didn't participate in Record Store Day, but they ran a great sale to make up for it. So I still went out on Record Store Day to go support my local independent record store. And that's what the crux of RSD really is supposed to be. It's not about, you know, the super exclusive releases, even though it kind of is, because sometimes they're awesome. RSD 2019, that list was stacked. I couldn't believe it. But really the spirit of the thing is engaging in a hobby and going out and supporting the independent business.
Yeah, well put. I was going to show you the one thing I have ever purchased on Record Store Day is this. This is Kenny Loggins at the Movies. All of Kenny Loggins' soundtrack hits. That was Record Store Day 2021.
That's a pretty cool release, honestly.
Yeah, it's really... It's not that, I dislike Kenny Loggins, but his movie themes are all of my favorite songs of his, so it's a pretty great compilation. Is there anything in particular that's coming up in this year's list that impressed you?
The Nuggets box set. I have gotten so many in the beginnings of when I started posting to YouTube. People were like, you're into all of these garage bands of the 60s, you need to check out Nuggets. And then I checked out Nuggets and it was great. And I still don't have a copy of the Nuggets compilation. So the RSD alternate track listing on their Nuggets box set looks really great. That's really the only thing that I have my eyes on. Okay.
So I have a couple I'll just mention, and I wonder if you have any reaction to any of them, because some of them sort of fall into, I think, your wheelhouse. One I was looking at was the Baker Gervitz Army from Ginger Baker and Adrian Gervitz. Are you familiar with that project? That's pretty deep.
No, I'm not familiar.
Are you a Ginger Baker fan?
Listen, what a guy. Firstly, what a dude. But I am crazy about his drumming in Blind Faith. That was some really great work. And it exemplified him being a jazz drummer that just so happened to be in all these rock groups. And I think that's really what I appreciate in a drummer is that jazz sensibility.
Yeah. And I think even Charlie Watts would say he's a jazz drummer before he's a rock drummer. I saw Ginger Baker in concert shortly before he died, and he at some point during the show, someone shouted out a song request or something, and he threatened to kill the guy in a non-joking manner.
Sounds about right. Yep. Sounds about right.
Which was made it was like price of admission right there.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so another Record Store Day special this year is going to be Beggar's Banquet from the Rolling Stones. That one ranks up pretty high, I would guess, for you. Is that among your favorite Stones records?
As far as Stones go, I do like that era, that sort of Beggar's Banquet to Goat's Head Soup, kind of late 60s, early 70s peak Stones. I do like that bracket. Does extend a little farther. I do like some Tattoo You. I will go to bat for their Satanic Majesty's Request.
That's right.
But I'd say as my ranking of those Stones records go, Beggar's Banquet does fall behind Exile and Sticky Fingers.
A previous guest on a show, a guy named Heath from a YouTube channel called Serial at Midnight, we were talking about the Rolling Stones, and he asked me my favorite Stones record. For me, it's Beggar's Banquet. For him, I think he said he started to say Sticky Fingers, and he was just like, "Well, it's got to be one of those four, right?"
Same question to you. What's your favorite Stones album?
I mean, you got to pick from those four, right? I'm a big fan of Beggar's Banquet myself. I think that's a great one, but I also love. Sticky Fingers is great. So this is where you talk around it. You go, well, and then so-and-so. Then Exile on Main Street's pretty good too.
It's got to be one of those from the late 60s to the early 70s. It's got to be, everyone has to answer one of those four. We kind of laughed about that. So it is sort of unavoidable. Okay, another one I looked at was The Wind from Warren Zevon. That was the last album he released before he passed away. I I don't believe you've talked about Warren at all on Vinyl Monday. Is he someone that might show up in a later episode?
If I can track down one of his albums, sure. I mean, Warren's been on my radar since high school from just a couple songs floating around. Yeah, definitely slips under the radar. Kind of an oversight I feel bad about.
Oh, my co-host and I have been doing a deep dive on Warren Zevon's career, and the one thing we keep coming back to with him is that he is unfortunately largely overlooked because, you know, the radio never really gave him another chance after Werewolves of London, despite a lot of good music. So if you have a chance to dig in, I would highly recommend it. And then the last album I'll mention that I'm definitely seeking out, I'm hoping to get, but I don't think I will because I think there's only a few copies out there. And I'm sure this is in your wheelhouse. It's called To Be a Man by Macho Man Randy Savage, his rap album from the 90s.
Why is that reminding me of the Corey Feldman classic double LP Angelic to the Core? That if they ever press that on vinyl, that will be on Vinyl Monday. As soon as I get that in my hands, I will push back the Beatles for that record. I will push back the Stones for that record. I don't care. It's
That's
so
awesome.
bad that it's fun.
That has got to be one of the best things about collecting records is finding the things that are like, what is this doing on a record? What was that? Dee Dee Ramone had a rap album in the 80s, which is, one. It's been on my
certainly
list.
a choice.
Right. Okay, we're having fun here, but let's start wrapping this up. Can you give us a tease or let us know what's coming up for you on Vinyl Monday?
Right. I need to remember what week it is and how far I am in my schedule that it extends out for months and months. I don't think people realize that Vinyl Monday is scheduled out pretty much until September. Through September, actually. I don't mess around with these things. And I am dropping Easter eggs to projects that will come to fruition in the late fall, and none of these people have any idea, and I love it. Listen, I grew up with Taylor Swift and her crazy Easter eggs, so I want to continue that. I want to just drop ideas for things that people will watch in months and go, that was mentioned all the way back in March. But in the
I notice on your channel, a lot of your viewers are really proud when they guess what your next episode is going to be.
Because I make a game of it.
Yeah, if that's a fun way to interact.
In the immediate future, May is going to look a little different. The formula for Vinyl Monday is going to stay the same, but I announced this a while back, but I feel like a lot of people have forgotten. May is going to be entirely modern classics. It's going to be all albums released within the past 20 years that I feel have significant ties to the records that I usually cover. I'm going to be talking like, how did funk and soul show up in a dance record that's having a big anniversary soon? How does prog look today? Stuff like that. So May is going to be a fun exercise in that for sure.
That is really exciting.
Yeah, as for the rest of April, if this is going to be up pretty soon, I feel good giving this away. Electric Ladyland is coming next. It's been a while since I covered a double album. And after that, I'm doing...
Can you show that artwork on YouTube? Or are you going to have to...
Oh, I have the US art. I have the Carl Barris art.
Okay.
And the last 60s, 70s album I'm going to be doing before this great big modern excursion that I hope people enjoy as much as I will enjoy making it. Oh, I hope this works. That last record is going to be Revolver, and I haven't done the Beatles in a minute. So people are going to be excited about finally having the Beatles back.
Very cool. Yeah, that does sound awesome. I'm very interested to hear your insight into that. I guess my last question is: Are there other types of content that you hope someday that you'll be able to produce that might not be the exact same formula as Vinyl Monday, but do you think maybe down the line you'll do other types of shows about other music, or move to different social media sites to do different sorts of content, or do you like what you've built with Vinyl Monday and just want to see what you can do with that?
Gosh, everything about Vinyl Monday has been a happy accident that I'm so grateful for. Vinyl Monday on YouTube really started with me just posting my whole record collection onto YouTube. Those were the first videos I ever posted. They're quite bad because I didn't know what I was doing. But that was really just a way to kick off a channel that I had no clue what to do with. But it was supposed to be a fashion channel. No one knows that. YouTube.com/Abigail Devoe was supposed to be a vintage fashion channel, and it just spiraled completely out of control in the best way. So maybe someday, if I could at least tap into the original intent of the channel, that would be awesome. But if I am stuck as the Vinyl Monday girl for the foreseeable future, bring it on.
Absolutely. Well put. I wish you all of the best with both aspects, whatever comes forward. I just have to compliment you real quickly in particular about the last video I saw of yours, which was about Joy Division. You said very briefly about Ian Curtis that you made this episode now because you are the same age as he was when he tragically passed. And you said you wanted your audience to see what that age looks like and sounds like and talks like.
The week of this video going up, I will be 23 years and 10 months old. That is roughly the age Ian Curtis was when he died. I'm covering this album now because I want you, my core viewer base, who is older than me, to remember what 23 years old looks like. What it talks like, acts like, thinks like, breathes like, eats like, sleeps like. I don't like that Ian and his death have become some myth, because once upon a time, he was once multifaceted and vulnerable and not a hero and a real person.
And I just want to say, like framing a conversation like that is more in-depth than most any album review you'd ever find. And it really impressed me, and how you talk about the material you cover is extremely insightful. Your passion is on screen at all times. I think you run a great channel, and you've hit 12K subscribers. I think that's only going to keep growing. I hope you're ready for that. And I just want to wish you all of the best for the future. Your show's great, and I really appreciate you coming by today.
Thank you so much. All of that. I wasn't prepared for anything you were going to bring up about the Unknown Pleasures episode, but having
that
that
point
episode,
knocked me out.
having
I had
that
to pause.
episode out there, and the response that I've gotten from a video like that, as well as Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, both of those episodes were tough to make. So
Yes.
having this response from both of them with music that has been so deeply entangled into my life, having people accept my deep personal connection to that in tandem with the history of the album and my commentary on the music, that has brought a wash of joy. It's very overwhelming. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad, because I think it's very easy, unfortunately, to leave that stuff out because it might be emotionally difficult, or maybe you're not sure how the audience would receive it. But I just want to encourage you to, don't listen to that way of thinking, because I think that's what makes your show special, is that you put yourself out there like that. It's very, very good stuff. It's part of why I'm a fan.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming by. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember the big 4 things you can do to support this show that don't cost a dime. Number 1, listen to the show. If you're hearing this now, that means you did this part already. Thank you. There is an infinite amount of content out there, so you choosing to spend some time listening to this show means a great deal to me. Number 2, if you like what we did here, please recommend this show to family, friends, or anyone you know who's looking for a podcast, particularly about music. Share our links in Facebook groups, subreddits, and recommendation threads. Whatever you can do is highly appreciated on my end. Number 3, find us on social media. Follow us on Twitter at PlayThatPodcast. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/playthatpodcast. And subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/playthatrockandroll. Lots of great material like photos and vlogs on all 3 platforms, as Play That Rock and Roll is very much meant to be a content hub as well as a podcast. And finally, the big ask. Number 4, please give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. I know this part is a hassle, but it really does help the show a great deal. Not just because it affects the algorithm, but also because it gives me something I can point to when pitching this show to potential guests. The more social media followers and positive ratings the show has, the better chance I have for booking high-profile guests for interviews. So if you take a moment to give us even just a 5-star rating, you are actively giving us a tool to do bigger and better things here. But whatever the case, I appreciate any and all efforts you take to support us here at Play That Rock and Roll. Be sure to join us next time for more great stories and music from the world of classic rock.